Chapter 5, Introduction. Histology. We know that histology, of course, is when you have two or more cells collectively together. Of course, it creates a tissue. Histology, of course, we know is a microscopic anatomy, and it's the study of tissues. There are 4 classes of tissue that we are going to talk about. In this chapter, you have your epithelial tissue, your connective tissue, your nervous, and your muscular tissue. Let me just add what you do need to remember about your epithelial tissue. Table 5.1 on page 144, the representative locations. This tissue you would typically find lining your digestive tract, around glands such as your mammary, your thyroid, your sweat glands, your liver has this particular type of tissue, your kidneys, and also you're going to find it on the top layer of your skin, which is your epidermis. This particular tissue, of course, is more cellular. It's avascular, which means there aren't any blood vessels, which means it's difficult to heal. And, of course, this tissue is responsible for secretion, absorption, diffusion, filtration, and things of that sort. The connective tissue, on the other hand, which is the largest group, does just what the name implies. It connects things, the binding of organs, tendons. You will find this particular type of tissue in tendons. Tendons, of course, connect muscle to bone. Ligaments, of course, is a type of connective tissue which connects what? Bone to bone. Blood is a type of connective tissue because it's going to transport oxygen, CO2, nutrients, waste, and things of that sort. So it supports, it binds, and it connects. So your connective tissue is a really, really large group. That group starts actually on page 157, and it goes all the way back to your muscular tissue. So the first tissue on page 157 is an areolar tissue, which is a type of connective tissue. Nervous tissue and muscular tissue, there are 2 things you need to remember. These are called excitable tissues because they need a stimulus or a stimuli in order to send out signals or impulses. The nervous tissue, of course, your brain, your spinal cord, and your nerves. Your muscular tissues, you have your skeletal, the cardiac, and of course you have your smooth, which are your 3 types of muscle tissue. So definitely be familiar with the 4 primary tissue classes as well as their representative locations. The matrix, of course, you guys just completed a lab on tissues. The matrix, of course, is the extracellular material in all of these tissues. It makes the fibrous proteins as well as the ground substance. The ground substance, of course, is just typically like a background where you're going to find your cells, where you're going to find the different types of fibers such as your elastic fibers, your collagen fibers, your reticular fibers. They're going to be more in the ground substance. It's tissue fluid, ECF, interstitial fluid, intracellular fluid, any type of fluid. Of course, it's going to be your ground substance. So, for example, the ground substance or the matrix in your blood, of course, is plasma and cartilage. Of course, the ground substance is more of a rubbery, gel-like structure. It's kind of stony in consistency. And, of course, if you read page 145, it will tell you the functions or the importance of your ground substance. Your 3 primary germ layers you don't need to know because you will get that in Anatomy 202. Here, interpreting tissue sections, of course, what you do is just take a thin slice of a tissue and then you're going to stain it, put it on the slide, and you're going to observe it under the microscope because remember, this is microscopic anatomy. You can make a smear, you can make a spread, okay. Now, your epithelial tissue, as I told you, lines your body cavities. The epidermis, the top surface or the top layer of your skin, you're going to have it. Your body cavities that we've talked about, the perichondrium, the peritoneum, as well as the pleural external and internal linings of many organs, such as your small intestines, the stomach, the lining of your stomach, the endothelium, the mesothelium. You're going to find this particular tissue is very, very thin. It's very, very delicate. And it's, of course, it has more cells, and it can be one or more cells thick. It's found in most glands. As I told you before, they allow no room for blood vessels, which means this particular tissue is avascular. So any type of nutrients that has to come to this particular tissue is going to come by way of a connective tissue that lies under the basement membrane of that epithelial tissue. Typically, it's going to be your areolar tissue, which is highly vascular, has a lot of blood vessels. So any nutrients, oxygen, waste, things of that sort that need to come to this particular type of tissue is going to come by way of an underlying connective tissue, which of course is under the basement membrane. So your basement membrane, all of your tissues will sit on a basement membrane. If you look on page 149, you can see the basement membrane for both your simple squamous epithelium as well as your simple cuboidal epithelium as well. They all have a basal surface, and they all have an apical surface, which is typically the top layer. The basal, of course, is kind of like in the basement because it faces the basement membrane. Of course, you need to know the difference between simple and stratified. You need to know your classes, and you need to know your shapes. Now your simple, as you can see, contains only one layer of cells. If you look at letter A, simple, there are 5 cells, which is only one layer, and of course it's resting on the basement membrane. The stratified, on the other hand, contains more than one layer. If you look at pseudostratified, pseudo means false. It kind of has the false appearance of having many layers because some of the layers, they all rest on the basement membrane, but some of the layers, as you can see, are covering up the shorter cells, and the taller cells, of course, are actually reaching the apical surface. And the stratified, as you can see, has more than 2 layers. Looks like it has, you can have from 2 to 20 cells, the stratified layer. The stratified epithelium tissue is found in area. It's a sort of protective tissue. It has more layers because it's found in areas where we have a lot of, protects us from chemicals, things of that sort. Resist abrasions like cuts or nicks on the skin, which is why you have the stratified epithelium. They're named by the shapes of the cells. Squamous, as you can see, are flat and they're thin. Biology. Hey, Jim. Yeah. Can we do it at 11? Okay. I don't know. Okay. Okay, bye-bye. So cuboidal, they're cube shaped. Some of them look a little round. They look like little boxes or squares. And columnar, they're tall, narrow cells. With simple, like I said, all the cells touch the basement membrane, which are stratified, such as your pseudostratified. Some cells rest on top of, the stratified, some cells rest on top of others, and they don't touch the basement membrane. You need to know these types here, the shapes of them, thin, scaly, or your simple squamous. You only have one layer of thin, scaly cells. They're flat. simple cuboidal, of course, you're going to have one layer of cube, square, or round cells. In simple columnar, you're going to only have one layer of tall, narrow cells that resemble columns. If you see stratified squamous, of course, stratified squamous means you're going to have several layers of thin, scaly cells. Stratified cuboidal, you're going to have more than one layer of square or round cells. And stratified columnar, you're going to have more than one layer of tall, narrow cells. Here's your pseudostratified columnar right here. As I said before, it looks stratified. Pseudo means false because it has the false appearance of having several layers, although it does not. In your pseudostratified, you have goblet cells. If you turn to page 150 of your textbook, the simple columnar as well as your pseudostratified columnar cells, those two classes of tissues, they have your goblet cells. Goblet cells look like little wine glasses that are turned upside down. You have those goblet cells because they're responsible for secreting mucus. Mucus is a sticky, sort of semi-thick substance that's produced by your goblet cells, and it's found in your simple columnar as well as your pseudostratified columnar. So here's your simple squamous epithelium. I don't know if this one is on your test, but it's on page 149. This one, now like I said, this particular tissue is the most delicate type. It's very fragile. It's found in protected areas of the body. It allows for, you're going to find it where absorption takes place, diffusion, slippery surfaces. You're going to find this particular type of tissue that helps to reduce friction. You have it on top of your skin. Of course, it's going to you find it lining your small intestines because it's going to reduce the time. The small intestines are responsible for the absorption of our nutrients, for our foods. So it's going to decrease the amount of time required for the materials to go from your small intestines into your blood or to your large intestines. You can see that there are a lot of locations. Hello? Hey. In class, because I can't come right now because I'm doing something really, really important on Blackboard. So, what about tomorrow? Okay, because I'm free at 9:30. But I think Mr. Callaghan is in there at 9:30. Okay. Okay, so 9:30 tomorrow will be great. Okay, bye-bye. So the simple squamous, single row of thin cells, your alveoli, which are your air sacs, of course, of the lungs, allows for the diffusion of oxygen and CO2. Of course, you have it in your endothelium. Endothelium, of course, is within the heart. You have this tissue, the glomerulus capsule of your kidneys, and of course around the serosus membranes of your stomach, your intestines, and of course the mesothelium, which lines those ventral body cavities, the pleura, the pericardium, and the peritoneum, which we've already talked about in the previous chapter. The simple cuboidal epithelium, of course, this one is rare, and you can see that it's found in some of those glands that I mentioned earlier, liver, your thyroid, mammary, and salivary glands. Simple columnar, which I think is on your exam. Of course, you can have it around lining your GI tract, which is your small intestines. Your uterus, of course, you have this particular type, your kidney and your uterine tubes, and of course it's going to secrete mucus. It has the brush border, which is called microvilli. The microvilli, of course, increases the absorption area for your digestive tract, or the lining of your digestive tract, and also your microvilli is responsible for moving or sweeping things. So movement, like for example, the uterine tubes, the egg from the ovaries has to travel through the uterine tubes, and that sweeping motion from the microvilli, of course, is going to sweep it down to the uterus. Pseudostratified epithelium. These are columnar epithelium. It's highly represented, guys, in your respiratory tract. The male urethra, the epididymis, you're going to find this particular type of tissue as well. It has the cilia. We know what cilia is. Cilia is responsible for the movement of substances. People that typically, when anything such as dust, debris, toxins, pollen, things of that sort, the cilia in conjunction with the mucus, because the mucus is sort of sticky, the mucus is going to trap whatever can get into your respiratory tract, and the cilia, of course, is going to give it that sweeping motion and move it through the cavity, moves from the cavity to the pharynx, and either you're going to cough it up or you're going to swallow it. So that's important as to why we have the goblet cells and the mucus and the cilia in the respiratory tract, because you don't want anything that can harm your lungs or get deeper into your respiratory system to cause any harm. So you're stratified, as I said before, you have 2 to 20 layers of cells. Some of them are resting on the membrane. You have your stratified squamous, cuboidal, columnar. Transitional epithelium, of course, is your 4th type. Stratified squamous simply means you have multiple layers of thin, flat, scaly cells. Stratified cuboidal means you've got multiple layers of cube-shaped cells. And stratified columnar, which is rare, you have multiple layers of tall, narrow cells. Transitional epithelium, which of course you will see on your exam, there's no picture. Well, on page 152, they're showing you the 4th type, which is your transitional epithelium. You need to be familiar with the term exfoliation or desquamation. We're going to talk about, when we get to chapter 6, we're going to talk about the layers of the skin, the epidermis, and how mitosis occurs at the surface or the basal layer of the epidermis, because there are 5 layers. And of course, mitosis occurs there because these cells die and they flake off. So the new cells that are created at the basal layer cells, the basal layer, of course, is going to migrate itself further upward or towards the top. And once it gets towards the top or closer to the top, those cells are going to die and they flake off, which of course is called exfoliation. Some examples of exfoliation would be the scraping of the inside of your mouth. Of course, that's exfoliation, and you can view the cells under a microscope. On page 153 of your textbook, figure 5.12, they're showing you exfoliation of the vagina. So when you get a pap smear, they scrape the lining, your gynecologist scrapes the lining of your cervix to test it for cancer. And of course, amniocentesis, which is another form of exfoliation. That's when the amniotic fluid, if you're pregnant, the amniotic fluid, of course, is taken out of the amniotic sac. And of course, you can identify the cells to kind of determine if there are any type of abnormalities or congenital defects with the baby. Keratinized and non-keratinized are 2 really big ones and really, really important ones. These are on page 151. Please be familiar with those. Keratinized, of course, is found on your surface of your skin, which is your epidermis. The keratin, of course, keratin. Keratin, if you look, you see the dead cells, the dead squamous cells, because the farther they get to the top, they're going to exfoliate and flake off. This particular type is highly keratinized. Keratin, of course, is a protein. Keratin is tough, it's thick, it prevents water loss, it prevents too much water from entering the skin as well. So it has some protective features to it. Resist abrasion. You have this particular type, and the penetration of pathogens such as bacteria, fungi, anything harmful that can penetrate the skin. You have to have that thick layer on top. It has to be heavily keratinized in order to prevent pathogenic organisms from entering. Also, you find it's heavily keratinized. If you look at the palms of your hands, that skin in the palms of your hands is very, very thick. So that's considered thick skin that we're going to talk about in Chapter 6. The soles of your feet, of course, is heavily keratinized as well. The soles of your feet, of course, has very, very thick skin. The difference between this particular one, as you can see, you don't have the dead cells on this one. This one is non-keratinized, and you're going to find it particularly areas that are exposed to mechanical and chemical stress. You're going to have these, actually both of these layers. This one right here is found in moist, slippery areas such as your mouth, your tongue, the vagina, the anus, any of those moist areas. And you don't want this particular area to dry out because that would not be good. Transitional epithelia, of course, is a stratified type of stratified tissue as well. This is the fourth type. This one is found in your urinary tract, your bladder, the ureter. Of course, it's also found in the umbilical cord of fetuses. I don't think they have it in your book. But this one, like when your bladder fills up, the cells, as you can see, the ones on the top, they have the pillowy, looks like little inflated pillows or grapes or something. They're more round. Of course, when your bladder is empty, they're more round in appearance. However, when your bladder fills with urine, it's going to expand or stretch, and the cells, they become more flat, have taken on the appearance of your stratified squamous, because those cells are what? They're really flat. Connective tissue, some of them are highly vascular. However, your cartilage, of course, is avascular. Some of them, not all of them, have blood vessels. This one here is your most abundant group. Starting on page 153 of your textbook, you have the dense regular, you have your dense irregular, you have loose connective tissue, which is like your adipose tissue, your areolar tissue, and things of that sort. So definitely know the characteristics or the functions of each one. Binding of organs. You have your tendons and you have your what? Your ligaments. Tendons connect muscle to bone. Ligaments connect what? Bone to bone. Also, it's found around your kidneys and your eyes. It holds them or binds them in place. Support, of course, your bones and cartilage, of course, is a type of support. Cartilage, of course, your ear, your nose, places of that sort, of course, provide support there. And, of course, you have the bones that support the body, which is our skeletal framework. Physical protection, the cranium, which is your skull bone, of course, protects the brain. You've got your ribs and your sternum, of course, which is your rib cage that actually protects the heart and the lungs, per se. You also have fat around your eyes and your kidneys that can actually protect, well, like your kidney, you have a little bit around your heart that can actually protect those from trauma. You have white blood cells, which are called connective tissue cells, that we're going to look at a little bit later. They're actually on page 154 components of fibrous connective tissue. Those are all of your connective tissue cells that are involved in immune protection. Movement. Bones act as levers to allow us to move from place to place. Of course, your muscles actually pull on the bone to allow us to move. Cartilage, which is hyaline cartilage, which is found at the distal end of each long bone, is going to reduce friction between the two bones, and it actually keeps them from touching. Your vocal cords, we have cartilage in it that allows for our speech to occur, and you have hyaline cartilage that allows the airways to open in order for your speech to occur. Storage. Okay, we store fat. Your bones store calcium and phosphorus, which are the two most abundant minerals in the bone. You need to know that fat, of course, is stored in your adipose tissue. So you have fat cells, which are your adipocytes, that are stored in the adipose tissue. Heat production, of course, brown fat, which is common in infants and children, acts as a heat generator. Of course, the heat kind of stays embedded in the body. It's brown fat because of the numerous blood vessels and the mitochondria that gives it that brown color. However, most of the body, in adults, our fat, of course, is white. But in infants, children, hibernating animals, of course, you're going to have the brown fat because it generates heat. We're going to revisit that a little bit later. It's actually on page 156 of your textbook, so please read about that. Blood, of course, transports oxygen, CO2, nutrients, waste. You have lymphatic fluid that will lymph system or lymphatic fluid is actually transported through the body as well. These are your connective tissue cells. Fibroblasts, of course, the most abundant. They're kind of like stem cells. They're permanent resident in our bodies that produce your fibers and your ground substance. You have your macrophages, which are your big eaters. The macrophages, of course, you're going to read about a little bit later, is responsible in repairing tissue because they come in, they act as phagocytes to remove any dead, dying cells or any tissue debris after a cut or burn or thing of that sort. Your leukocytes, you have your neutrophils and your lymphocytes that make up that. As you can see, your macrophages and your leukocytes, they pretty much kind of have the same functions. They reside in the immune system. They attack bacteria, of course, toxins, and any other foreign material. Macrophages, of course, they attack the antigens. Plasma cells, they make the antibodies that attack the antigens, and some of them are actually, they arise from some lymphocytes. Mast cells, of course, two chemicals, heparin, of course, which is a blood thinner, is going to keep the blood, inhibits clotting. Histamine, of course, is another chemical that's going to dilate your blood vessels and allow them to expand. So histamine, of course, is a chemical that's released in the body during allergy season when you have allergies from the pollen, dander, or what have you. And of course, last but not least, you have your adipocytes, which are your fat cells that store the triglycerides, and of course they dominate an area. Certain parts of the body you're going to have more of it than others. Women have a higher concentration of adipocytes or fat cells in men. It varies from one region of the body to the next, and it also varies from individual to individual. So certain parts of the body you're going to have a little bit more adipose tissue, such as your hips, your butt, your abdominal region, your thighs, your breast, and things of that sort. Know your three classes of fibers. You have your collagenous fibers, which of course is the most abundant. It has a white glistening color to it. Tendons and ligaments. The dermis of your skin, or the deep layer of your skin, you're going to have this particular fiber. Of course, the reticular fibers, they are collagen fibers, but they're much thinner. It's going to form it's found in your lymphatic system, such as your spleen, the your lymph nodes, your kidneys, you're going to find this particular type of tissue. Your elastic fibers, of course, has the protein elastin in it, which actually will cause the fibers to stretch, and they're going to resume their regular shape or recoil back like a rubber band. So places that's prone to being stretched, such as the dermis of your skin, your lungs, your arteries. You have an elastic ligament between your vertebrae. Elastic ligament, of course, that connects each vertebrae to each other, and that's going to allow some degree of movement. They're branched, they're wavy, and, well, just know the three classes and know that the collagen, of course, is the most abundant. So we're about to go into the different classes here. This picture is in your textbook. This is your collagenous fiber, which of course is showing you your tendons, the white glistening appearance of your tendons of that particular type of fiber. You have your areola, you have your reticular, your dense regular, and your dense irregular connective tissue. The areolar tissue. Please read about it on page 155 of your textbook. This one right here, as you can see, passageway for nerves and blood vessels, is highly vascular. So you're going to have an abundance of blood vessels here. It's found pretty much in all parts of the body. You're going to have this particular type of tissue. You can see the ground substance, but the fibers that are actually occupying the ground substance, your elastic fibers, your collagenous fibers. So this areolar tissue, they have a nice picture of it in your textbook. Actually, it can change over to adipocytes, or your adipose tissue. It can differentiate, and of course they have a lot of representative locations in your textbook. Your fascia, which is between the muscles, is showing you a picture of the mesentery, where you're going to find this particular tissue. And as I stated before, almost every part of the body has it. It's a common site for drugs injection. It has an extensive blood supply. It has elastic fibers that makes it resilient, so it can return to its original shape. So you have your reticular tissue. As you can see, you have reticular tissue. Of course, you have your reticular fibers. This one, of course, is found around those lymphatic organs. You have, now we talked about reticular fibers, and now we're talking about reticular tissues. You know, your lymphatic system, you're going to have this particular type of tissue. Your lymph nodes, your spleen, your thymus, your bone marrow, you're going to have this particular type. As you can see, you have your leukocytes, which are your white blood cells that are actually occupying a lot of the ground substance. They are near the reticular fibers. This particular type of tissue, you have the blood cells, and of course the blood cells are needed there for those organs that are a part of your lymphatic system. Okay, so it's going to be soaked with blood, kind of like a sponge, as your textbook describes it. And of course, the sponge, of course, is going to be analogous to your reticular tissue stroma. So I know collagenous fibers, of course, will be on your exam. Your types of fibrous connective tissue, you have two of them on page 158 of your textbook. You have your dense regular, you have your dense irregular, your dense regular connective tissue. Of course, if you look at your collagen fibers, you can see that they have more of a wave-like appearance. They have their regular in appearance, wavy sheets. You find this particular type of tissue in your tendons, your ligaments, as you can see. You have it. The vertebrae, You have it in your arteries, so when your heart contracts or your heart is beating, this particular type of tissue is going to expand. So when blood flows through, it's taking pressure off the blood vessels. So you have it around your heart, tendons, ligaments, you have it as well. It's very, very tough, this particular type of tissue, and it keeps your blood pressure from dropping too low when the heart relaxes. This particular one, dense irregular, as you can see, the collagen fibers are in bundles and they're all over the place. This one you're going to have in the, like around capsules of certain organs, like your testes, your spleen, the kidney. Of course, is found around the cartilage, which is your perichondrium. It's found around bone, which is periosteum. And mainly the deep layer of your skin, you're going to have this particular type of tissue because it gives strength to our skin. So it constitutes most of the second layer of our skin, which is your dermis. Please read about adipose tissue, read about fat, why is brown fat brown. And like I said earlier, it's a space between adipocytes is occupied by areolar tissue, reticular tissue, and blood capillaries. So it's highly vascular. As I stated before, the areolar tissue can conform to the adipose tissue. Of course, white fat is found in adults. Brown fats, of course, is found in children, infants, and hibernating animals. The triglycerides, which is the most abundant fat that we store, stored fat is not stagnant. However, the amount of fat cells or the quantity of those fats that we consume, it keeps they're stable in a person, which means they don't go away, they're just there. So the fat is constantly recycled to prevent stagnation. So we're supposed to constantly break down or synthesize new fats and release it into circulation in order for us to keep our weight down. New triglycerides are constantly synthesized and stored. We store it, and then of course we get rid of it as well. If you look on the second paragraph, since the triglyceride is dissolved out by most histological fixative, fat cells in most tissue specimens look empty and somewhat collapsed with a resemblance to chicken wire. So the adipose tissue, as you can see, stores energy in the form of triglycerides. Very good insulator. Provides cushioning for certain organs. We have subcutaneous fat that we're going to talk about, which is fat below the dermis, which is the hypodermis. You have brown fat that produces heat in hibernating animals, infants, and children. Now, cartilage. There are three types of cartilage we're about to talk about. I'm about to talk about with you. Your fibrocartilage, your elastic, and your hyaline cartilage. Of course, the hyaline, of course, is the most abundant. The matrix, or the ground substance, of course, is rubbery or has a stony appearance to it. As I stated earlier, it gives shape to your ear, your tip of your nose, and your larynx. You have chondroblasts, which are kind of like stem cells that will give rise to your chondrocytes. Chondrocytes are cartilage cells. This perichondrium, of course, is a type of dense, irregular connective tissue that we talked about earlier. Of course, that surrounds your elastic and most of your hyaline cartilage. So your chondroblast, as you can see, is a reserve population that contributes to cartilage growth throughout life because they are your stem cells. Another thing you need to know, as I told you before, your cartilage cells, there are no blood vessels there. Some of them don't have blood vessels, so which is why cartilage heals slowly. And you have your three types here. If you definitely read, it says that cartilage only rarely exhibits blood vessels, which is on page 159. Nutrition and waste removal depends on solute diffusion through the stiff matrix. Because this is a slow process, chondrocytes have low rates of metabolism and cell division, and injured cartilage heals slowly. That's because this has very little blood vessels. Know that the difference between your hyaline and, of course, your elastic cartilage, the representative locations. This one right here, as you can see the matrix. Those little cells, lacunae, of course, is where your chondrocytes are going to reside, where they're actually housed. Of course, you find this cartilage usually covered by perichondrium, which is a type of cartilage around the hyaline cartilage. So your articular cartilage, which is found at the distal ends of bones, you have this particular type, and it reduces friction between your joints or bones. Costal cartilage, which of course is found connecting your ribs to your sternum, your trachea, your larynx. Of course, the fetal skeleton that we're going to talk about does not. Fetal skeleton, of course, is cartilage up until about 6 weeks when it starts transforming to actually bone. So this one right here, as you can see, is found in a lot of locations. Elastic cartilage, this one right here, your ear, you find this one is covered with perichondrium as well. It allows for flexibility and support. It contains that protein elastin. So if you bend your ear and it springs back, it's because of that elastic fiber or elastin, and it's found in the epiglottis as well. The fibrocartilage, of course, the pubic symphysis, which of course is a type of cartilage between your hip bones, your right and left hip bone, you're going to find it. The menisci is a combination of both hyaline and fibrocartilage. It's the pad that prevents contact between bones during movement. You find the menisci, which is cartilage in your kneecap, between your intervertebral disc or your vertebrae. You can see the little green section or cutout there. That's your intervertebral disc, which of course is found between all the 33 vertebrae in the body, and of course the vertebrae is going to act as a shock absorber, and of course the menisci is going to protect. It actually protects and cushions the knee. Here's your bone here. We're going to talk a little bit more about your bone. I don't think any of this will be on your exam, but we will talk. Bone, of course, is definitely an organ. We're going to talk about the 206 bones of the body, and they're telling you, actually displaying the femur and the mandible. Bone, of course, another name for bone tissue is osseous tissue. There are two forms of this particular type of tissue. You have the spongy bone, you have your compact bone. The spongy bone, of course, has a spongy appearance. Your red bone marrow, of course, is housed there. It has a lot of little struts of bone called trabeculae. Of course, the spongy bone is covered by the compact bone. The compact bone, of course, is more denser. It's more harder. Spongy bone is hard too, but it just looks like it's soft, but actually it's not. And of course, you have a series, network of blood vessels in your bones, which makes it highly vascular bone. So I'm not gonna spend any time talking about this. Looks like they're showing you a picture of the humerus, which is a bone, and the different layers of the bone. Like if you do cut a cross section or take a section of the bone out, they're actually showing you what it actually looks like. We are going to talk about your bone cells, like your osteocytes, your osteoblasts, your osteoclasts, and your osteoprogenitor cells. Your osteocytes, of course, these are more mature cells. They're the most abundant type of bone cell that we're going to talk a little bit about later. You need to know what is meant by periosteum. There's a type of connective tissue, dense irregular connective tissue, which is found around the bone. Peri means around, osteum means bones. We've talked about perichondrium. Perichondrium means around cartilage. So here's your blood. Just know that the blood and its fragments, you have your erythrocytes, which are your red blood cells, your leukocytes, your platelets, your neutrophil, your monocytes, of course, your platelets, which are, they repair tissue. They're responsible for clotting. You can see that the ground substance here is plasma. And of course, it transports cells and dissolved matter such as oxygen, carbon dioxide, nutrients, toxins, waste, and of course, things of that sort. Okay, the latter two, these are your nervous and muscular tissues. They're excitable tissues. There is what you call a membrane potential. Electrical charge difference that occurs across the plasma membrane is the basis for their excitation. The electrical charge difference, of course, between sodium and potassium is what causes these cells to be excitable. Of course, when there's a charge difference that goes on, it's called an action potential that we're going to talk about a little bit later in the semester. They respond quickly to a stimulus or a stimuli. So in your textbook, the nervous tissue, which is on page 163, you need to know the function of the axon, your dendrites, and the neurosoma or the cell body. Of course, your dendrites they're responsible for incoming signals. They take it to the cell body or the neurosoma where it gets processed, and then the signal goes out through your axon or your nerve fiber, and of course it's going to be connected to another neuron or nerve cells. So the signal gets transported from one neuron to the next. Of course, with muscles, it's a little bit different. Muscles, they contract, okay? However, in order for muscles to contract or shorten, there has to be a stimulus or, of course, a stimuli that's going to change the charge difference across the membrane of the muscle cell, which we're going to talk a little bit about later. So you do need to know that muscles are specialized for contraction, nerves are specialized for rapid transmission of signals from one neuron to the next. You need to know what an axon is, you need to know what your dendrites is, and of course you need to know what a neurosoma is. You do have glia cells that you're going to talk about. The glia cells actually protect the neuron or the nerve cell. So they're housekeepers of the nervous system. They're not responsible for transmitting signals or impulses. So they're just protecting, and they bring nutrients into the neuron or the nerve cell, the microglial cells. I'm not going to name them. There are about 6 of them that you guys are going to cover in Anatomy 202. So know the functions of these. The dendrites receive signals, transmits it to the neurosoma. The axon and nerve fiber sends it out, and it sends it out to another neuron or another nerve cell. You can see that this tissue is found in your brain and your spinal cord. Muscular tissue, there are 3 of them. You need to be familiar with your skeletal, cardiac, and smooth. You need to know which one is striated, which one is non-striated, what is meant by voluntary and what is meant by involuntary. So here you have your skeletal muscle here. Your skeletal muscle, of course, is striated, and of course they're voluntary, as you can see. Striated means those little stripes that you see, you have alternating light and dark bands, which you call your I bands and your A bands. That's how you know they're striated. Of course, they're showing you the calf muscle, a skeletal muscle tissue, not the bone, but the muscle itself. And of course, there is a nuclei there. This one is pretty much multi-nucleated. You can have multiple nuclei within that muscle tissue. And like I said, it's voluntary because we can control the contraction of our muscles is under voluntary control. And of course, some places that you will find it, most of them attached to what bone to allow us to move from what place to place. They're also called muscle fibers, found in your tongue, your upper esophagus, your facial muscles. Has a diverse group of muscles there that we're going to talk about that gives us all those different facial expressions. Some of your sphincter muscles, we're going to talk about a little ring around the urethra and the anus that opens and closes that allows for urine and your feces to flow. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. Cardiac muscle is limited to the heart. Cardiac means heart. So these are really small, well, they're cardiocytes. If you look in your textbook, cardiocytes, cardiac muscles, they're myocytes or cardiocytes rather than fibers. The cells are much shorter, so they are commonly called, they're really small cells. There's only one nucleus. It's not multinucleated like skeletal muscle. You have what you call intercalated disc that you can see, which looks like a little band going down that are actually parallel to each other. What these do is they connect those cardiocytes, which are your cardiac muscle cells, together, and the impulse travels from one cardiocyte to the next. Electrical connections at these junctions enable a wave of excitation to travel rapidly from cell to cell, and mechanical connections keep the myocytes from pulling apart when the heart contracts. Okay? The electrical junctions allow a wave of electrical excitation to travel rapidly so that all the myocytes of the heart chamber are stimulated and contract almost at the same time or simultaneously. Okay, so the intercalated disc, as you can see, is a dark transverse band separating each myocyte from the next. There has to be no nerve connection here because the heart has a built-in pacemaker. Also is striated and involuntary. You can see the little stripes here, but we don't have any conscious control of the beating of the heart. The smooth muscle, as you can see, is smooth. There are no alternating light and dark bands going on here. It only has one nucleus. A lot of those visceral organs or muscles, you're going to find this particular type of tissue, the smooth muscle. The digestive, your respiratory, your urinary tract, you're going to have this particular tissue, propels contents through an organ contents like food materials that travel through your digestive system. There's a type of contraction called peristalsis contraction of the stomach and your intestines that allows the food to move from one organ to the next. It regulates your diameter of your blood vessels, so it controls your blood pressure. It causes your blood vessels to dilate. It causes them to constrict as well. Of course, labor contractions, you're going to find this particular type of muscle, the uterus, of course, is going to contract when you start having those labor pains. And like I said earlier, that sphincter muscle. Now, your anus and your urethra has a combination of skeletal muscles and your smooth muscle because the anus and the urethra has a skeletal muscle around it that's going to contract, and it also has that smooth muscle which of course is involuntary. It just won't let your urine and your feces to be expelled, allowing you to hold it until an opportune time. Hair follicles, the piloerector muscle, which causes your hairs to stand on end when you get the goosebumps, is a type of smooth muscle contraction. We have absolutely no control over that. Read about junctions, which are not going to be on your exam. You do have glands that we're about to talk about, secretion product useful to the body. Anything that has to be used inside of the body, of course, is going to be secreted, like digestive enzymes, and of course salivary via the salivary gland. Anything that has to go outside of the body, of course, is going to be excreted. Two types of glands you need to be familiar with, the exocrine as well as the endocrine gland. You do need to know which one has the duct and which one does not have the duct. As you can see, the exocrine gland has a duct. The endocrine gland, of course, is ductless. Exocrine glands: sweat, the milk from your mammary gland, the tears from your tear glands, of course, has to travel through a small duct before it actually reaches the surface. So they're showing you on page 168 your exocrine and your endocrine glands. And they're showing you what the duct actually looks like. The endocrine gland, on the other hand, does not have any ducts, as you can see, and it normally secretes a substance directly into the bloodstream. Typically, they're going to be hormones. This is just some more information. It's just showing you here how the different structures of your exocrine gland, how they all look, how they're all different. Types of secretions: you have serous, you have mucus, you have mixed glands, and you have your cytogenic glands. I don't know if this is on your study guide, but I mean, you're going to have to know it eventually anyway. Serous gland, of course, the secretion, of course, is very thin and watery. Perspiration, your milk, your tears, and your digestive juices in your digestive tract or your stomach. Mucus, as you can see, we've already talked, that's your goblet cells secretes what mucus. It's a little bit thicker than the serous gland, and of course it's found in your tongue, your mouth, the roof of the mouth, and it's mucin. When mucin absorbs water, that's when it becomes mucus, and it takes on that sticky appearance. So it's secreted by your goblet cells. And then of course you have your mixed glands, like your salivary gland. Is a combination of serous and mucus. Your salivary can be a little thin and watery, and sometimes it can be a little thick and a little sticky. And of course you have cytogenic glands. They release whole cells. Your sperm cells and your egg cells, of course, will fall under the category of cytogenic glands. American glands. So how how do our tears, what is the mode of secretion? How do we secrete our tears? What method is used? Your pancreas, your gastric juices, and things of that sort. Okay, as you can see, your American gland right here, of course, you have those little vesicles, secretory vesicles. They're going to pop, and of course you're going to release the product by a process called exocytosis, and it's going to travel to the surface. That's how your tears do it. Your pancreatic juices in your pancreas, your gastric juices in your digestive tract, and of course as well as other places. So it's really a type of apocrine gland. That's all over the body. Now the apocrine gland, on the other hand, this is where, as you can see, it's American. The same process is the same way over here. The American mode of secretion. Your sweat, okay, has to be released by a process called exocytosis. The milk in your mammary glands, of course, is the same way. Holocrine glands, of course, these are your oil secreting glands. The entire cell, as you can see, is going to pop. Mitosis or cell division occurs with this particular type of gland. It secretes a mixture of cell fragments and synthesized substances. This particular type of gland here is also called the sebaceous gland, the holocrine gland. It's called the sebaceous gland. So what happens is the entire cell, as it says, is going to disintegrate, and any type of lipid and other fragments that are in there, they're going to be released, and they're going to travel through a duct to the surface of the skin. These are your oil-producing glands. They produce oil on the scalp to make your hair oily. We're going to talk about them again when we get to chapter 6 on the integumentary system. They make the skin oily. Your eyelids, of course, can get really oily. And, of course, their secretion is much thicker than the latter two. Cutaneous membrane. There are various membranes. Cutaneous means the skin. Okay, there's a covering of the skin called the cutaneous membrane. You have your mucous membrane. That's, of course, around that's found in your digestive, respiratory, your urinary, and your reproductive tract. And, of course, you're going to have the lines passages that open to the external environment. External environment is something that has to come out of the body. Serous membrane, you're familiar with this one. This one, of course, is found around those cavities that we recently discussed, the pericardium, the peritoneum, and the pleura. Of course, you know those, each one of those has a cavity, the pericardial cavity, the peritoneal cavity, and the pleural cavity. And inside of that cavity, of course, you have the serous fluid that actually is released to keep those organs and structures moist and slippery. And, of course, it's a simple squamous white epithelium. It's also found around the heart. The endothelium part is found around the heart. Synovial membrane, of course, lines your joint cavities. This is a type of connective tissue. The hyaline cartilage is, of course, is the connective tissue layer that they're talking about. You have a synovial cavity that secretes synovial fluid to keep the joints lubricated. You need to be familiar with hypertrophy, tissue growth, hypertrophy, and hyperplasia. tissues do grow, there's going to be an increase in the number of cells, or existing cells such as your adipose sites can actually get larger. So when you have an increase in the number of cells, that can lead to an increase in your height. When you have an increase in existing cells, when they grow larger, that means like your adipocytes, you can actually gain weight. Hyperplasia, of course, that's when you have the increase in size because you have the tissue growth through cell multiplication. Hypertrophy, enlargement of pre-existing cells. You work out, you build up muscle. It's by way of when your muscle gets larger, it's hypertrophy. And like I said, when your adipocytes get larger, of course, it's going to lead to body fat. Neoplasia, on the other hand, is a tumor. It could be benign or it can be malignant. And a benign tumor can become malignant. Read about tissue development, and it just talks about how tissues, metaplasia, differentiation. First of all of these tissue, there's what you call mesenchyme. That mesenchyme can differentiate into any of those tissues because it's kind of like a specialized type of tissue, sort of like a stem cell. Mesenchyme can become adipose tissue, of course, and of course you gain your weight back after you've had liposuction. Metaplasia is simply meaning tissue can change from one type to another. Of course, simple cuboidal tissue of the vagina before puberty can actually go to what? Stratified squamous after puberty. And of course, the tissue, pseudostratified columnar of smokers, can actually differentiate to stratified squamous epithelium. Read about tissue repair on page 172 of your textbook. There's a nice picture on page 174 of your textbook that will help you to understand how tissues can repair themselves. They can do it in one of two ways. They can regenerate. Tissue regeneration is, of course, the tissue is going to be replaced by the same cells. So when you damage a cell or a tissue, of course, the same type of cell is going to occur. Like, for example, if you cut your finger or you get a little nick or something in your skin. Normal function is restored. Skin injuries, of course, your liver regenerates. So any type of cut or scrape, of course, that's a form of regeneration. Fibrosis, on the other hand, the tissue has to be replaced. This particular type is a little bit more severe, so it's going to be replaced. The damaged cell, of course, is going to be replaced with scar tissue, and of course, normal function, of course, is not restored. So examples of this would be like a third-degree burn, a major cut, tuberculosis that can cause your lungs to scar, as well as the healing of muscle injuries, but it just depends on the severity of it. Atrophy, of course, is important. You need to know what atrophy is. You can have senile atrophy, where you're going to have shrinkage of a tissue, which is typically a muscle due to just normal aging. Disuse atrophy, of course, from lack of use. If you are confined to a wheelchair, if you have a limb or something in a cast, if you're paralyzed, if you're bedridden, of course, disuse atrophy will kick in, which means that muscle, of course, or that tissue, of course, is going to what? Shrink. Necrosis is just the death of a tissue. It's just dead, dying tissue it could be from burns, it could be from a toxin, trauma, of course, infection, Infarction is just a heart attack, sudden death of the tissue such as your cardiac muscle or your brain tissue. So you can have a cerebral infarction, a myocardial infarction, a heart attack, or you can have a stroke or a CVA. Gangrene, of course, is tissue. When the blood supply is cut off, there's not enough blood getting to that tissue, and gangrene, of course, can actually kick in. Dry gangrene, of course, is common in diabetics. Of course, the cubitus ulcer, which of course is called a bed sore or a pressure sore. Blood is not flowing to that area, which is a form of dry gangrene. And of course, you can form, ulcers can form. Of course, it can be very destructive to that particular tissue. It can actually, ulcers can form all the way down to the bone. And of course, certain people that are confined to the bed, and it's common around bony prominences like the hip bone, the heel, the elbow, the shoulder blade, places of that sort, which is why you have to constantly turn those people. Apoptosis is programmed cell death. Normal cells, once a cell completes its function, of course, it's going to die and get out of the way. During embryonic development, the separation of the fingers and toes is a form of apoptosis. So when you have the webbing, it's going to separate them. Shrinkage of your breast after you're done with breastfeeding infants is a form of apoptosis. The uterus, after you've had a baby, of course, is a form of apoptosis because the uterus is going to resume its normal size. Billions of cells die by apoptosis, so it's a built-in suicide program. So I think this is it that I'm going to cover. I've covered enough, so I hope this helps you with your next exam, and if you listen to it, you'll definitely be successful on it. If there were some slides that I kind of skipped over, of course that information is not going to be on your test. Make sure you look at your study hints to see what will be on your test, and maybe you can mark your study hints as you listen to the lecture.